Welcome back, guests. Good to see you, Mike. How was the beach last week?
It was great. I was in a great part of the world in the North Island Powell River Federal Riding, having a week's vacation on the warm waters of the Comox Valley.
Keeping it timely for the pod, I see.
Yes, yes, we have a big North Island theme happening these past 2 weeks, actually.
All right. And Geoff, how was the boating?
It was fantastic. A boat called the Advise, which is about 70 years old, was built as a halibut boat in Prince Rupert. A friend of mine owns it, who's a retired fisherman, and he was moving it around from Steveston, where there still is a fishing industry. I was surprised to see how many seine boats there were in particular, around to Barkley Sound, where they increased the size of the sockeye run estimates from 750,000 to 850,000. So that was all happy news. We had a great trip.
Fantastic.
So you went around the Cape.
We did, and it's only the second time. Normally got there by road, but the previous time I was seasick, not this time. Off Cape Beale, it seems to be a bit of a passage there.
Yeah.
Waves from every direction.
There's that on the west coast of Vancouver Island, one of the there's a lot of shipwrecks off of there. Did you see the BC Liberal Party shipwreck off the coast of
No,
west coast of
no.
Vancouver Island? Wasn't there?
Totally
Not on the maps.
submerged.
Yeah.
It's deep underwater. It's in the
Yes.
Marianas
Can't be
Trench.
reached.
There was a lot of changes
Checking.
happening over there
Asking
because
for a friend.
the road finally got paved, and we stopped in Bamfield and stopped in Ucluelet, both of which are
Wow.
fundamentally transformed in recent years. But Ucluelet's still got a lot of its, I think, resource community
Charm.
flavor
Yeah.
to it. Yeah.
Great part of the world.
Nice.
Yeah.
Nice. Fantastic. Well, welcome back. And welcome back for, we have a guest today that I think this is one of the names we've been talking about for the longest. And he's someone who's played no small part in transforming BC's political landscape and making a supersized impact on social media. After our guest checks out, I just want to let guests know, Geoff, Mike, and I are going to go to the strategy suite. We're going to cover today. We'll go back to ferries, courtesy John Rastad, who has a plan to build ferries here in BC, and he's launched that with an ad campaign. We're going to touch base on Mark Carney, who apparently is a real fan of oil. And that seems pretty clear. And, is that landing for David Eby?
The Oilers and the oil. Yeah.
There you go. Twofer. We'll talk about the BC Greens, who have two candidates fighting to lead their party, and a little quiet process that might change our electoral system that our guests may not have heard of yet. And we're going to give that a little due attention. But first, we are pleased to welcome Aaron Gunn, Conservative Member of Parliament for North Island Powell River. Elected in the recent federal election, Aaron converted an NDP riding and turned it blue, winning about 39% of the popular vote. But who is Aaron Gunn? Is he a millennial firebrand? Is he a plain-talking truth talker? A square peg maverick trying to fill in a round hole party caucus? Is he the danger that his opponents claim him to be? Some quick history. Aaron was raised in Victoria. We learned in the past episode he went to high school with BC Conservative Party President Aisha Esty. That was some grad class. He served in the 5th British Columbia Field Artillery Regiment of the Canadian Army Reserve, led the charge in BC for the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Canada Proud, and then brought forward his own brand of social media commentary through documentary-style videos that garnered millions of views. In particular, and I think we've talked about it before on this pod, his documentary, Canada is Dying on Homelessness, Addiction, and Street Crime, stands at 1.5 million views on YouTube. His YouTube channel has 99,000 subscribers. He has over 100,000 followers on Facebook, compared to 20,000 for David Eby or 5,000 for John Rastad, just saying. He also has close to 50,000 followers on X. You're probably getting the picture here. Welcome to Hotel Pacifico, Aaron.
Thank you for having me. I'm very excited to be on here and to talk to all of you today.
This is a straight ratings gimmick for us.
Social media
Please amplify this to your audience here. We're desperate for more ratings here.
I'd be happy to. No, you guys do great podcast. So I'm often tuning in and listening on these long drives up to Port Hardy that I have to do.
Oh, fantastic. I'm glad to hear that. So then you probably heard some shout outs. I mean, we've talked about your high school years a ton. So now we have the band here. Can you take us back? I want to talk a little bit about maybe your kind of genesis in politics and being kind of invested in politics. If we go back, were you sort of born a champion of free speech and fiscal restraint, or did this emerge later? And when did you really get involved in politics?
Well, I got involved in politics. I walked into it would have been in middle school. No, would it have been middle? It was the 2005, 6 election. So that was straddling over Christmas, I think. And it was that summer when I think it was a minority government. They didn't know when the election was going to be called. So the local Conservative Party in Langford opened a campaign office, and I just walked in and wanted to help out. As far as what got me interested in politics, or what made you conservative, I think it's always a convergence of factors, how you're raised, your culture. But my kind of gateway into politics was definitely history. So I was very into history as a young kid. And the more you read about history, the more you realize that, in some ways, history is kind of the history of politics and the leaders that we have in governments that shape world events and then shape who we are today. So that was kind of my gateway into it. And once I kind of got a passion for history and hearing stories from my grandfather who escaped during the Hungarian Revolution and lived through World War II, and my grandmother as well. It got me interested in, okay, these events are really cool and what happened, but how do we shape things going forward? And that was kind of that was my pathway in.
What figures from history do you identify with?
Figures in history, I guess, what do you mean by identify with? Did I
Well,
look up to
were
or?
there
Look up to.
when
Yeah.
you're young when you're younger and you were digging into the history, were there some leaders that you said, "Well, I really admire that person. That's someone I'd like to emulate."
Yeah, I think that it's evolved over time. Someone like a Winston Churchill has always been a constant. And the more that I read into him, as the kind of the admiration grows. Maybe about 10 years ago, I started going down like a Canadian kind of history path. And this is all going to connect to some other issues, I think. But John A. McDonald became somebody who I really looked up to, and just the leaders that took on massive challenges and made changes that kind of echo to today. So you look at a McDonald or a Wilfrid Laurier, so early Canadian history, which is not something we learn that much about in our school. Everybody knows World War II, and there's a bazillion Netflix documentaries about it. But those are two that definitely stand out. Those are
I
probably the
was going
two.
to ask about John and McDonald because I think the first time I heard your name, I was working in Victoria and you were doing a live to video sort of, I guess, Instagram or something about the council's decision to take away the John A. McDonald statue from Victoria City Hall in the dead of night, practically, I think. And you did quite a good satire on the whole thing. I could tell then you were you were not going to stop with a few Instagram or X posts. But John A. McDonald was a touchstone for you, obviously.
Yeah, and I think that was my first million view video when they tore down
Mm.
the statue outside of City Hall in Victoria, which is where I view one of the kind of the cultural was a very important issue for me, and it's also I think one of the ways where I kind of earned a following because other people weren't saying it or were very slow to say it at the time. So that was kind of a niche that I walked into. But yeah.
I think we'll circle back to this, but can I ask you, is it resonate with people so much because um, they have a view of Canada that is sort of immutable for them, like they're like in the United States, there's people who have foundational views of the Constitution and the founders had a particular way, or is it because they're seeing it in a new way or responding to criticism? What is it that generated a million views for you there? Because it's something that's been part of your politics all the way through.
Like on the McDonald issue in particular.
Well, Canadian history, I guess that Canadian history is contested, and you're an advocate for a particular view, and seeking to conserve and protect I guess a perspective on Johnny MacDonald and other issues that has been very important to you politically. And I just wonder what if you can speak more about how that is, what drives that, and why that resonates so much with so many people.
Well, I think Canadians are less in your face about it than say Americans, but Canadians are very proud people. They're very proud to be Canadian. They're very proud of Canada. Obviously, there's been a bit of an uptick since all of the crazy tariff stuff with the United States. And so I think when the denigrating of Canadian history or tearing it down, throwing the baby out with the bathwater, not being not celebrating Canada Day or people that think that we shouldn't be. I think that there was um, a natural a lot of people that frustrated them. That was a natural aversion to that, and so they were looking for somebody to kind of stand up and say, yeah, nobody's perfect. Somebody from the 1800s is somebody from the 1800s, but we're an incredible country. We're proud of it. We're proud of what we accomplished, and we're proud that we're not that somebody carved out a separate country in British North America in the middle of the 1800s, and we're not part of the United States, and we're proud of that. And we think we should be able to celebrate it while still alongside acknowledging things that we could have done better.
Yeah, thanks.
I wonder sometimes with that discussion because I think I'm curious. I feel like sometimes I feel like underneath this is the struggle about how we talk about historical figures who maybe there's a lot to celebrate about them, and then there's stuff about their record too that was harmful. The sort of idea that we can't put someone up on a pedestal and they're one thing or the other. And sometimes when I react to this discussion, when I'm reacting to this, I have this sort of like, well, why is a statue so important? Because I think I can see sometimes for folks who say it's under-recognized the harmful part of their record, and we want that part. That's why we feel like these naming buildings after them, putting statues everywhere needs to be walked back. But on the flip of it too, then I kind of feel like, why is it so offensive to remove a statue? Like, why you're sort of relating that to the idea that we're then rejecting our pride, our national pride, and rejecting Canada Day. Why does it feel like it's connected in that sense to you?
I mean, I think there's, I think building a statue of someone is one of probably the ultimate forms of kind of celebration. So you're celebrating that period of history. You're celebrating that individual and their accomplishments. And I mean, the inverse of celebrating, I guess, is to or to not to people want to be able to celebrate Canada and its history and its accomplishments, and to remove because you're not I mean you're erasing I guess you're tearing down statues, erasing history. I mean, it's not like the textbooks are being erased or the information's going anywhere or something like that. So what I think is it's yeah, you're not celebrating the history of Canada. Why it's important to celebrate the history of Canada, I think that's part of a national identity. I think there's a fight going on right now. I don't think a nation can survive in the long term if its national identity is just a set of values that it happens to have at one particular time. It has to be the story of a country. Why are you Canadian? Especially Canada, because we're not an ethno state. So we always have to be asking ourselves, why aren't we American? And I think the answer to that is in our past and the journey that we've all been on together collectively, for better or for worse, since 1867 and before. And I think those statues are important markers of that journey that we've been on together. So I think I hate. There's a couple things I hate about the tearing down of statues. Like I hate the viewing people from 150 years ago through the lens of today. I think there's a certain degree of historical ignorance there. There's the taking things out of context. There's the uh, kind of armchair thinking that you could do better, and sitting here with the advantage of hindsight in 2022. If you went back to 1867 and the incredible challenges it would have been to govern a country all the way back then. And then there's also the thing like of course somebody that had a 20-year political career 150 years ago is going to have done things that you disagree with, or right. But it's like when I don't know, your great grandfather passes away or something. Like when you look back on them, like let's settle. We're not forgetting the bad things that happened. We can have those conversations, but let's also come together and celebrate the amazing things they did accomplish. And like in the case of John A. McDonald, he literally built a country that turned into a G7 country. From the Atlantic to the Pacific, delivered on the Canadian Pacific Railway, was seen as a very progressive leader in his time in many ways on a variety of social issues. So like and I also think the statues personally are can be an important conversation starter and gateways for people being interested in history. So
Well, there's, good evidence that you're right with the statue. Like, and I think you were saying that was your first north of 1 million views, that video. And I think I don't know if I relate to it, but I hear like people react to statues really, really strongly. And I think you and your communication style have shown a really strong knack for understanding what people are gonna react to. That I think you capture something very effectively of a sort of an ethos that people identify with. And I want to talk about how you've kind of how your communication style and your social media strategy has sort of evolved. I mean, when you first got into making YouTube videos, like how much was that a more organic type quick conversation, or how much have you sort of did you have a view towards curating a channel and a view of the world?
I guess it would be a mix. So the issues that I decide to cover are like I think one of the reasons I've been successful is I'm a pretty authentic person. So that doesn't mean you have to like everything that I say, but that I believe what I'm saying and I'm passionate about it. Of course, how I deliver that message is tailored in a way to curate for different social media following. So if you deliver a message over Instagram or Facebook, for example, it's different than over YouTube or X. How long the message is, how front loaded the key parts of the message have to be because of the different attention spans at different times. You got to hook somebody with the lines. There's a strategy to it. But to me, no matter what I was doing, whether it was at the Taxpayers Federation or making videos or running for public office, my overarching goal is we're only on this planet for a short period of time, and I want to affect change in a way that I think will move the country forward in a better direction. So that's the opportunities that I'm always looking forward to or looking toward. I rarely comment, for example, on stuff that's going on in the US because there's a million other people doing it. So I try to look at where can I have the biggest impact? And you mentioned Canada's dying and Vancouver's dying. Those were two documentaries where I didn't think people were talking about. I used to live on Pandora Avenue in Victoria. So like I watched that situation deteriorate while I was at university. And so it was an opportunity where I thought I could say something on this and help move the needle. So that's what I'm always looking to do. And McDonald, even within the Conservative Party, I find there's a lot of people that have these instincts to preserve Canadian history and defend it, but there's a lot of people that don't know anything about Canadian history. Like there's no Netflix documentaries. There's very few books, to be honest. The books, the words don't fly off the page, which is unfortunate because I think we have a really cool story to tell and some great dramatic incidents as well, whether it's the 1885 rebellion, Louis Riel, all that kind of stuff. So I think
You
I
did
think we had
something
a
very unique in the way you were bringing issues out before your elected career, which is you built a brand around Aaron Gunn,
Mm.
um, and you were with the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, kind of representing them for a time, but then it just became Aaron Gunn. So walk us through how you decided to do that because you pulled it off, given your social media strength you have, and you became most people think like if I'm going to like speak out in the media, I have to speak out under some umbrella, political party or stakeholder group or something like that. But you're just Aaron Gunn. How'd that work?
Yeah, well, so when I left the Taxpayers Federation, I actually left. My thinking was I'm going to leave politics and maybe come back to it later in life and start a business. And I had just started the process of starting a business that had nothing to do with politics. And then someone named Jeff Ballingall called who ran Canada Proud and Ontario Proud Facebook pages. And we had a mutual friend. And I had a background. I used to have a video production company when I was in high school and university. We used to film like weddings and graduations. So I had a passion for politics and a skill set in communications from the taxpayers and from this film background. And Jeff had heard about this and he reached out to me and he was wondering if I could make short videos for their page and he'd pay me a bit of money. And while I was starting this business, I'm like, this sounds fun. Like I'm ranting anyways. I might as well film it and get some money and throw it up. So that's what I did. And that was in 2017. And then a bunch of those videos took off under the Canada Proud banner. So for the first year, like all the videos just appear under Canada Proud. And then there's maybe a 2 year period where I figured, okay, I'm onto something here, but I'm not able to capture these followers or anything, so I should set up my own brand and my own page. And then the videos were being uploaded on both for a couple years. And then I decided that I just wanted so then I went from I was just doing 3 minute videos, which was great for building follower counts, but I felt like I wasn't able to get into the meat of the issues and drive change. So I wanted to start doing documentaries. And for that, I broke away from Canada Proud very amicably and just started focusing on my own brand.
Guess, have you heard the expression snatching defeat from the jaws of victory? It's come to mind for me recently, and let me explain. Quick refresher, we spent the last couple of weeks talking about removing barriers to interprovincial trade and how this can support stronger competition amongst telecom companies, which is good for consumers and a win for affordability. But, as I mentioned, some large telecoms are fighting to reduce competition and threatening to withdraw investment. They're lobbying federal cabinet members to overturn a decision by the CRTC that forces carriers to share access to their high-speed internet networks. Now, I'm going to name names because, let's be clear, this isn't about small or even medium enterprises trying to get a toehold. We're talking about Cogeco. And while Cogeco happily piggybacks on TELUS's wireless infrastructure here in the West, out east, Cogeco doesn't want to share. And they're lobbying to avoid having to play nice in the Ontario-Quebec sandbox. Hometown team TELUS believes in real competition. They behave and invest in ways that strengthen the Canadian economy through the removal of trade barriers. So, in the end, better, more innovative products and services come to market at better prices, and consumers win. So, as we await Cabinet's decision, let's hope we're not about to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory on interprovincial trade and affordability, because there are real wins in this for all of us, but consumers especially, if we stay the course.
What I think is really interesting about your approach is that you don't do a so-called objective journalism where you show both sides. Like I'm on your email list, and I know you say repeatedly, as a politician now, resource sector workers, I have your back. Loggers, fishermen, miners, a very distinctive group, but also high profile in your own writing. But when you interviewed fishermen, which was an area I worked in for a long time, you didn't spend a lot of time going off to see Department of Fisheries and Oceans to say, well, what do you say about what these guys are saying? Are they right or wrong about marine protected areas? So you provided space for their point of view at length, at least in the YouTube versions, and we're not too and gave them that backing, which I think was a key reason why you would then garner support, because their views are often never respected, I guess I would say. And so is that part of the appeal? I mean, you're aligning with people, and I'm not accusing you of being biased in a bad way, but you're kind of a tribune or an advocate for people who otherwise don't have access to the media. Is that part of the appeal in your strategy?
I think so. I mean, like you could call it, it's like my videos in some ways I think are like op-eds, and like I'm presenting. I've looked at issues and then reached an opinion. Sometimes that kind of conclusion is drawn almost before the documentary starts. Sometimes as I'm making the film, there's new revelations that I then include in it. I mean, part of it is also who will sit down and talk to me. So that determines sometimes who's included
Yeah,
in the
all journalists
documentary.
have that experience.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, but it's also the one thing I find that I never do gotcha interviews or gotcha journalism. So, I'm not going to sit down with somebody if um, i- if I think that they're not going to. Um, I'm not going to take somebody out of context ever. I'm not. So and then I just bought. So, there's a lot of documentary film. I think that most documentary films, like on Netflix, basically have a point of view,
Yeah, I agree with
and
that. I agree
the
with that.
view is developed through the story. And I think some people also interview what you might call both sides, and then use some of those interviews disingenuously to drive their narrative home. So I just tended to stay away from doing those interviews at all for the most
Can I
part.
cross over into a political question? I mean,
Sure.
it's been striking to see how the federal conservatives under Pierre Poilievre have identified with working people. Generally
Mhm.
speaking, construction, heavy industry, blue collar, generally speaking. And that's certainly part of your politics. Given the writing you're from, it's hard to imagine it being otherwise. But what about the attitude to the labor movement? The conservatives have generally not been keen on trade unions and trade union organizing and strikes and the restraint of trade that implies, and feather bedding challenges and all of that kind of stuff. Is this conservative movement shifting to support for the labor movement or an engagement with the labor movement in addition to identifying with some of the concerns of working people? to me, that would be a bigger threat to the NDP than just liking
Yeah, I
neighbors.
mean, well, I think it's not just happening in Canada. It's happening around the world, or at least in a lot of Western democracies. But yeah, I think it's the political landscape there's a realignment happening for working people and working class people and conservative parties making more overt appeals to them. Um, I mean, how that came about, I mean, to me, it's natural. Like, it's not like I'm sitting there plotting this out. And I think there's always been a bit more of that maybe in Western populism in Canada, but with the resource sector and things like that. But yeah, if you look at it like elites versus non-elites, and but it's definitely um, I don't know if I can pinpoint it, but I mean you're right. You're accurate. Like that's a group of people that we're appealing more and more to. I mean, I can tell you knocking on doors in this past federal election, like there's very distinct trends. Like if you were talking to, a tradesperson that was under 50, they were almost 100% voting for me, like
Yeah.
almost without question.
But
And
I said I would know the answer to this question if Pierre probably have voted for the anti-scab law that came forward in the last session of Parliament. Because to me, that was about supporting trade union rights, freedom to
Mhm,
bargain collectively, to strike. And he did. He surprised
Mhm.
me. So that suggested to me that the conservative movement was very serious about this and making a long-term play that might have repercussions for the old policy book. But anyway,
mhm.
we've spent a lot of time on this, but thanks for your answers.
I want to my own version of political history. I want to
Hmm.
talk to you about more recent history. Is following the 2020 election when the Jeff's team whooped the BC Liberals, um, and John Horgan triumphed to a massive majority. The BC Liberals needed to change horses, change
Another
leaders.
Langford historian, by the way.
Yes, yes, the Langford connection again. Um, and you were already established as a voice on the non-NDP side of the spectrum, and you decided to dip your toe in the waters to seek the leadership of the BC Liberal Party, even though you certainly weren't seen as a liberal, but the BC Liberal Party of the day was, supposed to be embracing of all perspectives on the non-NDP side. So the your nomination papers were rejected, and I'm just going to stop there in the story um, to just ask you, first of all, why did you want to pursue the leadership in the first place? Um, were you looking to force the issue of whether people of your brand of politics would be welcome in the BC Liberal Party?
That was part. I mean, my overarching goal. I mean, I can go back to the 2020 election. I remember watching the debate with some friends, and it was so frustrating for me because I felt that if you were a neutral observer from like a different jurisdiction, a different country, you wouldn't have necessarily been able to figure out who the supposed center-right candidate was supposed to be. It seemed like there was, as a conservative, that there was no option on the stage. And British Columbia's got a very healthy conservative movement with lots of conservatives and fairly consistently, federally they get around 40% of the vote or whatnot in and around there. So it really it felt disenfranchising. It felt like you didn't have a voice and felt like there was no one representing me and many people that I knew. And so I wanted to change that and push it in a different direction and create a clear alternative for British Columbians in the next election, either by running and winning or running and creating debate and discussion around these issues where there wasn't any, whether it's like decriminalization or carbon tax or all these issues that, if one of the major political parties doesn't pick it up, it's almost like the issue is dead and the media just leaves it and kind of moves on. So that was the genesis of it. And then a bunch of people reached out and asked me to run. And then we were starting to think about it, not that seriously at first. And then obviously you're waiting to see who else gets into the race and stuff like that. And I was a big fan of Ellis Ross, so we considered not running when he was clear that he was going to run and potentially supporting him. But I didn't think that he was going to pick up some of these other issues that I thought were important. And so that's kind of why
And you
we
weren't
ended up.
interested in supporting Kevin Falcon.
No, no. I mean, there's also part of the story of the BC Liberals where I felt that, like, I feel like what did the party in more than any particular policy was just their kind of institutional arrogance, is what I would
Mhm.
call it, and the need to feel that they didn't need to reach out to conservatives or young people or people in the new media space and all these kinds of things. So, um, but I didn't see Falcon as somebody who wanted to talk about these issues. I didn't see him as someone that had political courage to talk about them. Felt it was, every generation it changes. So it just seemed like he was stuck in the dynamic from 20 years ago. And the political culture had shifted. And I wanted to have, and I think a lot of British Columbians wanted to have new debates and new discussions. And he was kind of still in the, I don't know, keep the big tent together, federal liberals, federal conservatives. And it's just the times had changed.
Well, the party, I mean, won't belabor the issues about what led to you not being in the race, other than I would summarize it as the party officials thought you were probably too hot to handle um, at that time. But that led to a fork in the road for free enterprise in BC, where the party was I think looking to head to the middle because they lost a lot of votes in Lower Mainland, and you were positioned on the right, and you decided to go another route. Obviously, when you weren't in the leadership race and got involved in the BC Conservatives, and that seemed to be a pretty important turning point.
Yeah, I mean I mean the story even getting into the leadership race though, like it was always about it was the frustration there wasn't a clear conservative option in the election and that voters deserve that and I wanted that as a private citizen. I think it makes for a healthier democracy. I think like for example, the rigor, I think there's been much more rigorous debate because of the new BC Conservative Party. I think they stake out bold positions, creates leads to a more vibrant democracy. I think in the longer and medium term that leads to better decisions being made in the kind of the rough and tumble of politics. So that's yeah, and there was definitely a clear choice last election. So
You you are seen as a bit of a mastermind, though, of bringing the BC Conservatives back, though. Was it literally you in the engine room at the start?
I mean, Mastermind, I mean, we did it. I mean, the
Mm.
story I think I mean, it's maybe not that publicized, but we were kicked out of the BC Liberals. The whole team around me, which is, Asia, Angelo, Isidoro, Harmon, all tore up their memberships. And we waited a little bit to see if Ellis would win because
Mhm.
even if I didn't think he'd be perfect, there's no way I was going to mount a separate, resurrect a new party to challenge Ellis, who I think would have been really great for this province in many ways. And after that didn't happen, um, we looked at the BC Conservative Party. Well, we created something called Common Sense BC, which was a bit of a holding group. We moved like the policy platform from my leadership campaign that we developed to Common Sense BC, signed up a bunch of people. Then the provincial party was having their AGM. It was kind of a bit of a shell of a party at that point with a handful of people that had been managing it for the past 10 years. And there was another group of kind of PPC type people who are in the news again, actually, had been planning for like a year to kind of try to take over the Conservatives. And then we just signed up a bunch of people at the AGM, won all the board seats, and then set out on remaking and remolding the party. New brand, new logo, new brand, new website, all that kind of stuff. Harmon ran in the South Surrey by-election, got over 10%, which was a first important milestone. And then, of course, the BC Liberals kicked John out, which created an opportunity to have a voice in the legislature. And I mean, it goes without saying when we took over the provincial Conservatives, kind of the original plan was that I would become leader, but things changed and things also changed federally at the same time. And Pierre Poilievre had become leader of the party. So for a variety of reasons, we determined it made more sense for me to run federally. And John was very eager to coming over and taking the reins. So it all kind of worked out seamlessly over that next 6 months through a handful of meetings.
You definitely identified some harnessable energy there, I think, and some folks who felt like there needed to be a voice on the right and a sort of firm, distinct voice on the right. And you guys, harnessed that well. I want to ask, I think in some of that energy, you ended up accumulating some candidates who took some really, really controversial positions, and during the election, spent some time dealing with that. And I want to put it to you, like I'm going to say, I think that was a cost. Would you agree with that? And if you could go back, is there something you would have done differently in the vetting
You mean with the provincial conservatives?
with the provincial
So
conservatives?
I mean, other than being like really good friends with the people involved, the point where John becomes leader and that AGM, which I think would be spring 2023, is kind of where I exit from a decision-making point of the story. So I was watching what was happening and we were having conversations. I mean, I think, look, they had some candidates that were not great candidates. How you deal with that. Part of it is the part they were building the party as what the saying is, you're building the plane as it's taking off. They didn't have the structure in place to run rigorous nominations. I tend to be very much in favor of having rigorous nomination races and letting the best person win, as opposed to having kind of a party elite or establishment come in and pick and choose individuals. But it was a very unique set of circumstances. Of course, you also had BC United kind of imploding at the same time. They had those meetings where they took a couple of BC United candidates who became candidates for the
Mhm.
Conservative Party. So it was a really unique, I don't know if there's ever been a situation like this in Canadian politics where there's the official opposition is basically imploding a couple months before the election and making a kind of an agreement with another upstart party and trading candidates and stuff like that.
Is there
So
a part of
Well,
you that wishes you would have stuck with the provincial scene given what happened? Because at 2023, you probably didn't think they were almost going to form
yeah.
government, I'm guessing.
yeah, it was a higher risk, higher reward option. I look, my passion has actually always been more in federal politics. So in some ways, I feel like I got the best of both worlds. I'm a federal MP for a region that I absolutely love, working for and with a leader who I really respect, and at the same time, that original mission provincially of creating a clear alternative for conservatives in British Columbia, I would say has been 100% accomplished. And I mean, I went from being basically you're not welcome in the BC Liberal Party to my one of my best friends is the president of the party, and one of my other best friend is the executive director of the party. So things have changed pretty dramatically for me for the past couple years, in the past couple years, and yeah, so it's been, and I hope they don't repeat the same mistakes. So it'll be yeah, it's been
One,
quite.
can I run a mistake I think I saw and just see if you agree? Like, I feel like the way as everything panned out between BC United and the Conservatives and the deal that ended up being struck, the Conservatives really behaved as though voters had got the ick with BC United. And this is why I say mistake, because I'm like, I don't know that we ever know voters got the ick. I think voters saw something more appealing in the Conservatives. And I think some of the way that deal was struck, there was, I mean, and by the math, you could look at a couple seats that might have been viable and got them to government if they'd been more amenable to some of the United candidates, or places where the vote was split, right? Right. So I'm just putting that out there to you. Like, do you think maybe there was an opportunity there that was missed to treat BC United less like they had, like they were poisonous or that they were tainted somehow? Work with them more.
I mean, I guess the devil's in the de I mean, like, as on the issue of candidates, I mean, one of the issues I think, like to John's credit, is he didn't want to throw people under the bus who had gotten in on the ground floor and had spent time knocking on doors already or whatever for weeks or sort of or months in advance. So I think that was a principled position. I mean, I think yeah, I think there will be moments in the short term, or there maybe have been moments in the short term where the conservatives will pay a political price for standing by their principles. But I think that's actually that's worth it in the long term, and it's important for political parties to have principles in my view. And so, I mean, hindsight's 2020, and you go through individual, should they have taken this candidate there or not move? And there's usually stories behind everything in each individual riding. I'm
Well,
Mm.
just thinking of a couple in my head right now, but
so
so I think it's case by case basis. Of course, when you lose by that few votes in a couple seats.
Hmm.
You're always going to be like, well, if I did this or I did that, would that have made the difference to get us over over the edge?
Pop quiz from our sponsor this week, listeners. What is a deep energy retrofit? Well, it's more than just a renovation. A deep energy retrofit is a comprehensive upgrade to an existing building that significantly improves its energy performance. We're talking better insulation, tighter air sealing, and high-efficiency mechanical systems, all working together to cut energy use and emissions. Why does it matter? Because buildings are responsible for over 10% of BC's greenhouse gas emissions. Earlier this spring, FortisBC hit a big milestone, the completion of deep energy retrofit upgrades at Manor House, a 50-unit affordable rental building in North Vancouver, originally built in 1972. This project is part of a $50 million pilot program to find the best ways to cut energy use in older homes and multifamily buildings across BC, key to meeting BC's climate goals. The target? A 50% or greater reduction in whole building energy use. That means lower energy bills for building owners and keeping rent low for tenants. For buildings like Manor House, it also means helping keep rents affordable and ensuring residents live in a safe, healthy home that's built to last another 50 years or more. Hey FortisBC, how do I go about getting a deep energy retrofit at Hotel Pacifico? I mean, there's a lot of hot air. Anyways, FortisBC, energy for a better BC and a better podcast. So on to Ottawa. You're elected in April. Congratulations. You had a tough fight with the NDP. By my view of the results, I actually thought the NDP would be further back, and they showed some kind of, you know, dead cat bounce at the end of the campaign in on the island, actually. But what kind of MP do you want to be? Like, do we expect you to be a firebrand, a maverick who's out in the countryside fomenting uprisings, or do we see Aaron Gunn playing the inside game and rising through the ranks skillfully, uh, you know, staying on good terms with the party whip?
What I think is, I think that you'll see. I hope you'll see consistency, that it's going to be the same Aaron Gunn that's been around for the past couple of years. You'll see the same Aaron Gunn going forward. That's what I've tried to do the first parliamentary session that we had. Speak out on the same issues that I've always been speaking out on, continuing to do videos, to continue to speak the same way and to the same groups of people. And that's kind of, and because to me, that's just being authentic. And I think being authentic is an important part of my brand, but also what we need more of in our politicians. We'll see how that intersects with the realities of being a member of parliament and being part of a federal party. But so far, it's been great. It's been an unbelievable experience. It's a real team sport, politics, and the other MPs have been very supportive and helpful. And so I think part of it is, like you mentioned, kind of the firebrand. This goes back to even the federal campaign, the BC Liberal leadership race. Like I feel like the media and certain people in kind of the chattering class have kind of branded me as something that I'm not really, probably because they're the type of people that wouldn't have ever watched my videos. Like the videos are not, they're just being watched by ordinary people. And I don't think, even when they obviously spend however much money and time doing like Oppo research. Like at the end of the day, the vast majority of the positions that I've staked out are pretty mainstream conservative positions. And the language that I used 99% of the time, I think is pretty in line with, things that Pierre Poilievre would say, for example, on issues, and most conservatives in British Columbia. So I don't know if it's because, I was young, I'm making these short videos on Facebook on controversial issues that kind of created this firebrand uh, persona or whatnot. But and I was not afraid to take on issues that maybe the BC Liberals wouldn't take on at the time. But I don't think, I mean, yeah, the biggest videos I've ever done: drug decriminalization, the Johnny McDonald statue stuff, attacking the ICBC monopoly, going on about cost of living issues. I mean, these are pretty bread and butter conservative issues. And on a couple occasions, I might have been a bit at the forefront, like on the drug stuff and the politicians kind of followed behind. But I've never, they're supporting the resource sector. I've done so many videos on pipelines and energy and forestry and so but I don't think I'm really the one talking. There's people in Canada and around that really push that, walk that line, and I really don't feel that I'm one of them for the most part.
You know, in your riding, the federal Liberals did everything in their power to shut down fish farming. Our previous guest was Dallas Smith, an Indigenous leader in your constituency who supports fish farming, but many do not. Literally hundreds of jobs at stake. Do you think there's a way you can save those jobs or find a balance that will lead to the protection of the investments that are there? Because I know it's a big deal in your riding and a hot issue.
Yeah, I mean, what I've told people is I don't want to be the member of parliament who's elected and then 1,000 jobs leave the riding a year later, or 2 years
Which
later.
is a crusher in your riding.
Yeah, I mean, it's very concentrated, the jobs there. And what I've said, because you have people like, for example, in the commercial fishing sector, you have people that are conservative on every other issue who oppose fish farms, um, which is unusual. But what I've told everybody, whether they're, in forestry or commercial fishing or sports fishing, is like we have to apply the same standard to everybody. So let's have the highest environmental regulations in the world. Let's rigorously enforce those regulations. But I don't believe that like we can't continue down this path of the country of making, when it comes to resource development, these political or ideological decisions. Have the process in place, have the highest standards, enforce those standards. But if a company comes in and meets those, and then they should be allowed to proceed and create jobs and investment here in Canada. So that's kind of my view, and I think everybody should be treated equally. And I tell people in the forestry sector, that's the standard you want to be held to, so don't apply a different standard to fish farms or whatever the case may be.
Mhm.
What standards should we apply to ferries? You've been talking about this one recently. And I want to ask it in the sense of like, I'm sure you know as well as anyone how badly we need these ferries. We need to be able to get them affordably. So, what's the case for sort of at this point in the game with these BC ferries? Like, I don't know, ripping up the contracts, with China and trying to do it here. Like, what is the real next step on ferries if you were making the decisions?
Yeah, well, we just called back the transport committee, so they're going to be talking about this. I haven't seen the contract, so it's hard to say rip up the cancellation fees or whatever. I can say that I don't think there ever should have been a contract, specifically with China. I mean, this is an industry that's got dual use civilian military applications. China's a obvious geopolitical kind of adversary of the West. Likely their main priority is to try to reunify Taiwan over the next 10 to 20 years. And we're using taxpayer money through this low interest loan that's got, a value, I think BC Ferries said, of over $500 million to subsidize a purchase of a ship from a Chinese state-owned shipyard that's creating jobs and industrial output in China, which I think is a crazy decision. I think it's a horrible use of taxpayer money and very inappropriate. I mean, I do think that we should be building these ships in Canada if possible, and if not, then an ally. And I think that's a reasonable ask. And we were at the touring the Seaspan shipyards, and I mean, we're already, they've got naval and Coast Guard contracts here on the West Coast. Um, and yeah, they couldn't. I mean, and to be clear, they were quite clear. Like they would like to build these ferries, and they have the capability to the ferries are much easier to build than some of the big Navy ships that they are building, and they kind of say, well, they don't have capacity right now. But I mean, BC Ferries, like if we want to be a serious province, you think you would be making these decisions, 10, 20 years out about your timeline of when you want to get these things built, and then you should be planning accordingly to build that capacity out. And like I said, or at the very least, go to a South Korea or a Germany or a Poland or something like that.
Well, the rumor has it that the pirate packs on the BC ferries will be built in British Columbia. So,
Okay, well,
yeah,
there's
so
baby steps, baby
um,
steps.
as long as White Spot's still there,
It's still serving.
still serving. Well, I mean, but seriously on the issue though, I mean, and I've been posing the question in recent pods, which is like, okay, if we don't build them in China, that's a decision to make that we're not going to have the most inexpensive ferries. We're going to have more expensive ferries. So that's a choice that we accept, maybe higher fares, right? Or more taxpayer subsidy of these boats. Do you accept that as fair comment? Like that's a choice we have to make for geopolitical reasons?
Well, I guess you could say there's an opportunity cost, but it's not like, I mean, our previous ferries were not built in China, so I don't think
Hmm.
that we need to build them in China, or else we have to have higher fares. So I wouldn't accept that choice. But yeah, I think building them in China should be a non-start. I should also, a state-owned shipyard in China, a country that, in addition to being an adversary, is also engaged in, has put tariffs up to 100% on some of our agricultural products, and also does not engage in fair trade practices in many ways. And I think they've been shown many, many times to use things like predatory pricing to try to corner markets in key industries like shipbuilding. So I think yeah, I think China should be in. I think we can have a conversation about, other countries, but I do think it's important from a national security angle that you identify key industries like shipbuilding and making sure that you've got homegrown capacity for things like that, which is obviously what the shipbuilding strategy is that we're doing with our Navy and Coast Guard vessels. But it seemed like it would have made sense for BC Ferries to be part of that.
So let's talk about, let's stay in Ottawa and talk about the next federal election. I'm curious. I mean, maybe I can double barrel this question because I want to ask you about what you think it's going to take for the Conservatives to win the next election, and maybe couple with that a bit of can we start even actually with a bit of a postmortem of the election that just happened, and what was your takeaway from voters, and why the Conservatives didn't form government?
Well, I mean, I think two reasons. One, you had like a historic NDP collapse, which was disproportionate on the whole, obviously not good for the federal Conservative Party. We got our best results since the 1980s. I'm sure anyone on this call, if you had said that we were going to get more than 40% of the vote, a couple years ago, and not form government, that would raise a lot of eyebrows and confusion. I think it was the highest two-party share of the vote since like the 1930s or something like that, the 1920s. So it was so the NDP, and then also the chaos with the United States, Trump's rhetoric um, around trade, and a uh, new liberal leader, Mark Carney, who was able to appeal to a subset of Canadian boomers who had previously voted conservative that went and voted liberal. So those are the two things that happened. And despite that, we came very close to winning. And I think our kind of the new conservative coalition that Pierre's put together is more sustainable than the ones that the Liberals currently has. And he's going to obviously have a little bit of a honeymoon period here, but I think come the fall and come next winter and spring, we'll be in very good shape. And I think we have an exciting team and a lot of exciting new MPs.
Did you get criticized for being too pro-Trump? I mean, I heard that criticism. Do you think it was effective? Was it valid?
Well, from a political perspective, I think it was effective. I think Trump just turned off Canadians so much, particularly boomers, that people were just looking for the inverse of Trump. And that became the new issue. And before Trump, the top issues were cost of living, being fed up with Trudeau, wanting a change from Trudeau, looking for the opposite of Trudeau. And then it switched to wanting the opposite of Trump, basically, because Trudeau exited this stage and Trump entered. And Pierre is he's just from a personality perspective, you're more aggressive, things like that. And Mark Carney, I think, just played the boomers in particular could really identify with him in that particular moment in time, and most policy discussions became secondary. So, despite that, I mean, we did really well. We did really well among millennials, Gen X, different ethnic groups, obviously new Canadians. So I think we made a lot of inroads. Part of the NDP vote came to us for sure, and I think is probably going to stay with us. But yeah, I think their messaging on Trump from a political perspective was very effective. The whole elbows up stuff, and it was very frustrating to watch because I think that they've kind of shown since getting it like it was just rhetoric is all it was. But
Can I hear some of your thoughts on maybe the premiers? Because I think I think you're bang on in naming the moment kind of called for this like anti-Trump vibe, which for some of the progressive leaders was like a little easier. And then if you were conservative, I think we saw really different reactions if you compare like a Ford and a Smith, right? And I'm curious if there are any premiers who stand out for you as doing a particularly good or particularly bad job relative to Trump.
well, I mean, I think Ford did a good job from like a messaging perspective. I mean, I'm in it for the policy and like the substance. So I see like Ford loves kind of the cheap talk and stuff like that, and I guess that works for him. I mean, I shouldn't say I follow Ontario politics that closely, but it could be frustrating. I think Pierre is another very authentic conservative, and it's just this kind of and, maybe for Trump is like that though, where it's a lot of rhetoric for him, and it's hard to know where the rhetoric starts and stops and where the actual policy begins and what's real and what isn't. And maybe Ford was better at playing that game of rhetoric, and it was confusing for even for me because it's just like I don't know what is real here. Like what are we actually having a conversation about on trade? Like what are you actually upset about? And what is just for the clicks or to gaslight everybody. So it uh, yeah, so it was challenging. I hope that we're moving past that now. But yeah, I mean the annexation talk was so ridiculous and such
Yeah.
a crazy distraction in the middle of a Canadian election and the period just leading up to a Canadian election.
Do you
Uh,
think Danielle Smith's breaking ranks made sense?
I mean, I wasn't following it that like breaking ranks is in like going down to
Yeah, yeah.
order and
And then
stuff.
sort of saying, basically saying like, energy won't be, and oil from Alberta won't be part of any deal, right?
I wasn't following it that closely. I mean, maybe I don't know, it was accidental kind of good cop, get bad cop setup that the premiers were probably doing unintentionally. But I mean, I'm a big believer in Canada speaking with one voice on the international stage wherever possible. And I was even not not a fan of Justin Trudeau, but some of when Trump started going after him, it kind of it rubbed me the wrong way. At the end of the day, he's our prime minister, so like he should kind of mind his own
Yeah.
business, basically.
Yeah. I
And
mean, the way he did it wasn't denigrating Justin Trudeau so much as saying that our prime minister is only a governor, right? Like I
yeah,
can,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah,
It
yeah,
was like he might have saw it as just denigrating Justin Trudeau, but I saw it as but it was a tricky issue for conservatives. I don't definitely don't fault Pierre at all. I mean, it was a really odd convergence of events. Um, and I think if just one of the two happened, I think we would have won easily. So if the Trump stuff was happening but Trudeau stayed on, or the Trump stuff didn't happen and Trudeau stepped aside and Carney came in, I think we would have still sailed to a majority government in either of those instances. But it's those convergence of those two events. Yeah, hindsight's 2020,
It's
but
politics.
that's politics.
Um, so
And you know
moving,
what? I was telling people for months, you're gonna run away with this election. This is done. It's not. I'm like a week's a lifetime in politics. Anything can happen. And just coming out of the BC, what happened in BC politics. So,
yeah, no kidding. So
yeah.
moving forward, it sounds to me like you're going to be supporting Pierre Poilievre through the leadership review.
yes, 100%. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I think I mean, what he accomplished, building the coalition, the increase in the popular vote and the raw vote, the inroads he made with different groups. And I mean, for me though, if like we compare it to previous conservative leaders, he also stuck by conservative principles in my view.
Mm.
He didn't try to. You obviously hone your messaging a little bit, but for me, that's really where the line is do you stick with your principles? Because at the end of the day, that's why you take a lot on the chin getting involved in politics, as I obviously have. And so I'm only doing it to actually impact change and for reasons that I believe in. And I think that he believes in those same values and he's committed to them and not very wishy-washy and stuck through them the campaign. And he's also not like I hate politicians that are weather vanes. And maybe this is Kate mentioned this, or I alluded to this when I was talking about Doug Ford a bit, like politicians that just focus group everything and then try to create policies based on what the focus group says or what the polling says. What I'm looking for is a leader who finds the policy that's going to be best for the country. Then maybe do some polling and focus grouping to see where it's at, and then saying, okay, how can I convince other people to get on board? And being a leader, it's like trying to find out where the parade's going and just jumping in front of it, or actually leading people to where they need to go. And I think we don't have enough of the latter in our society right now. And people are looking. I always find, like, even you get the conversations about left versus right, and there's a lot of people that a lot of voters who haven't made up their mind on lots of issues, who aren't, and they tune in during elections, and they're looking for politicians to tell them, or to not tell them, to persuade them on why they should be supporting a certain subset of policies. So that's what I'm looking for, and that's what I try to do as well.
It was a pleasure to learn more about you, Aaron, and to hear more of your thinking. Thank you so much for joining us at the hotel, and I hope we get to talk to you again sometime.
It's been great chatting with all of you as well. Thank you for having me.
Okay. Glad we finally had Aaron Gunn on. Been talking about him for ages. It was a pleasure
Yeah.
to meet the man. Hear some of his background. Let's get into it too, because I'm going to pick off some of where that discussion left off. I think we need to come back to ferries, and specifically because John Rustad has a plan to build those ferries here in BC, and he's launched that with a video, very Aaron
Well,
Gunn style video too. I have to add.
yeah, I'm not sure how much of a plan it is, but he does have a video.
Okay, sorry, he's calling. Okay.
Thank you, Mike.
Last time I checked, last time I checked, it had Aaron Gunnish levels of viewership. So
Yeah.
I think probably around 500,000 views.
Yeah.
So, although I haven't seen much else behind it. Like, I was looking for a news release on it, and there was nothing other than what they said in the election. But the Cole's notes on it is that BC Conservatives think that ferries should be built in British Columbia, and therefore not in China. And so they've got the video out, okay, great.
I think the
How
question
much?
is, somebody needs to do a poll and see how the public actually feels about this,
I
because
agree.
the contract is signed. No one really argues there is an existing shipyard that could do it. In fact, there simply isn't. And every other shipyard would charge a way bigger price for it. So given all of that, we'll see what happens in this committee. I think the committee hearing in
Yeah.
Ottawa that was just referred to by Aaron Gunn, is going to embarrass the federal government, which
Mhm.
apparently was unaware that there was a a loan in excess of $1 billion when Chrystia Freeland wrote a stormy letter expressing her dismay and
Yeah.
outrage to David Eby. So I don't think there'd be another province. I'm going to complain here about Ottawa's indifference to BC, where such a letter would come off without a call first to the Premier's office to say, taking a look at the
Yeah.
larger set of relationships, and maybe a call to some of the other parts of the federal bureaucracy to see what the facts
Yeah.
are. I mean, we've been through this already, but now the Conservatives are picking it up both provincially and federally, and we'll see how far it goes.
That's such an
And
interesting point.
and
Is that a go ahead? Yeah.
who's in charge of the Canada Infrastructure Bank?
Yeah, yeah,
Greg
exactly.
Robertson.
Another arms, well,
Yeah.
sort of, but it's another one of those arm's length bodies
Well,
where
he's
you
the
don't want the
minister,
politicians
minister
meddling in, right?
responsible.
Like,
That's why he's getting dragged into it now.
But I was going to say, like, isn't there a bit of a like, when there's relationships there is a call, and when there isn't a call, and like these are
Yeah.
some of the upset now of staffing up and everything else, and just
Well, and
meant
Aaron
that.
Gunn made a second point, which I will draw a New Democrat into, which is Wab Canoe, who wrote to Ottawa saying, could we please have a coherent China policy, because my farmers are dying out here since you decided to
Mm,
tackle EV stuff for that guy Trump,
mm,
or that seemed to be related to Trump. And now we're getting killed on our canola sales. And should Canada sell to that despicable country, China, when it comes to canola, or should we just keep it here and hope that somebody will buy it? There's a
mhm.
lot of contradictions right now
Tons
in
of,
Canadian foreign policy, and they're coming home to roost.
and if you
Yeah.
don't want to buy Chinese stuff, don't go to Walmart. Like
Well,
it's
let's start a
like our
list.
entire supply chain is made in China. So let's just
I know Mike's
get
going to
over
raise
it.
this topic, so I won't raise the part that he's about to raise. But I think most levels of government were happy to see that first shipment of gas go to Asia, including China. So, the LNG project has a big Chinese dimension to it through PetroChina.
So
Can I
there's
ask? Yeah,
well, just on the ferries, one
yeah.
last point I wanted to raise is one thing I've been harping in the last few weeks about there's a trade-off, folks. So let's just be open and honest about the trade-off.
Yeah.
If they're gonna ferries are gonna cost more, we're gonna pay more, right? So okay, fine. Maybe we're prepared to take that trade-off. It seems like Aaron Gunn is prepared to take that trade-off. Um, and that's fine. That's a choice we have to make. But what I don't understand as I learn more about this is that these large ferries that we're ordering are meant to be ultimately electric
Hmm.
and they get charged at the terminal. And I don't know how that's going to work, but leaving that aside, is that was it because of the specifications of the ferries being electric that only China could do it?
I don't think so.
No, I
I thought
think
it
a
was
lot of
also
the,
just the capacity of the yards here. Like I haven't heard
Yeah, I'm
that
not
brought
saying
up.
C-SPAN could do it, but did that rule out the Polish and the Romanians and the
Some
well,
of
I
the
think in
European options.
fact, I mean, I stand to be corrected by many of the shipyard specialists in our audience, Mike,
yeah.
but
I'm putting it.
there
Yeah, let's
is
put
a
it out
Canadian,
there.
there's a BC
Let's put it
company
out
that
there.
makes marine batteries that are installed in a Scandinavian ferry, but nothing at the scale that these Chinese ones would be at.
Mhm.
So yeah, there's a lot to be said about that part of it. And I think that the government deserves to be faulted for not requiring offset sales to the degree that was possible. Investments here in BC or
Yeah.
even in Canada with the thing. They could buy a lot of the stuff to fit out a ferry that way, and that's what's happened in the past.
I
Mm.
just assumed they were going to be LNG ferries, like they've been retrofitting the ferries to
Well, I think
LNG.
Hmm.
they could
No,
be to
the
start
fair
with.
point. Yeah.
They're going to be diesel until they become electric. So I
Oh,
don't know
okay.
how that works either. So
Hmm.
anyway, a lot of questions out there. So
Yeah. Well, we get to hear more.
we'll hear about it at the
Joys of
Transport
committee.
Committee, the Federal
Yeah.
Transport Committee.
Joys of
Yeah.
the committee level. All right. I'm going to move us along. We have a clipping this week. Our clipping is Chris Varco in the Calgary Herald with the headline Carney says it's highly likely an oil pipeline will make Ottawa's major projects list. I'll pull a quote from this one. And I think this is a quote. Yep, this is a quote directly from Carney. Quote, it's highly, highly likely that that will be the case, that a pipeline will be on this list. And the only reason why I don't say it definitively is this is not a top-down approach from the federal government saying, we want this, we want that. Carney said. So it's saying, I mean, it's Carney saying, like, this one's my favorite. Like, he's picking a favorite child on the projects list, I think. Um, and I'm wondering, Geoff, are you sort of I want to talk a little bit about some inside the caucus there, the New Liberal caucus in Ottawa. Are you thinking this is going to get a strong reaction? This is a pretty pro oil position from Carney. I'm also just going to note and shout out to the photo editor who picked the photo that went with this piece of Carney in a giant cowboy hat, which was very apt. Well done, no notes. But is this going to cause like we've been talking a bit about whether the Liberal caucus is going to start to revolt on some of these positions. Is this something that's going to give them some internal headaches?
No, I don't think so because they're so delighted to be reelected that they'll put up with anything. And Mark Carney's not just eating Pierre Poilievre's lunch, he's eating the entire buffet while he's in secret talks with Trump about a new defense and economic superstructure, about which we know nothing, but
Mm.
apparently may have a second pipeline in it. And again, I say as someone who is a Canadian, proud Canadian, and a proud British Columbian, why would we privilege Danielle Smith's interests in having a second pipeline over the concerns of British Columbians, which are real and long-standing about the protection of the coast? There's a moratorium in place, a whole set of other things. So there's many issues that and projects that the BC government has put forward, I'm sure, but an obvious one and a very simple one we've talked about before is making sure we get phase two of LNG Canada done without a new pipeline, but a huge increase in revenue and so on. It's a massive project. Why Carney would simply lean in to Danielle Smith and maybe have something to do with the separatism referendum in Alberta. Who knows? But it's not a sign of respectful relations with BC. And Gregor Robertson, who was not notably a pipeline supporter, has now said he supports oil pipelines. He was quizzed on this by Stephen Quinn. Is going to be
Hmm.
sitting in that caucus. I don't think there's any question that Carney has the full support of his caucus. He got him there. They're not going to buck him for a long time. The question is, does the moratorium and all the other factors play into what finally happens here?
And what does EB do with this? Like, does he sort of drop the "we're not doing this"? Does he change his tune at all?
Well, I think EB has struggled to find a position on this because he didn't want to be put in this position, first of all, by Ottawa. There was no need for it. There was no proponent and so on. So this is being created out of thin air. That was obviously one of EB's frustrations. The second frustration is that the moratorium in Northern Waters is a big deal for a lot of First Nations. I mean, it was just, I think, about 2 years ago that some of the oil companies gave up their offshore drilling leases that were there since the 70s and 80s. These are very, very deep-seated issues in BC politics, and one of the top liberals out of BC, David Anderson, was the guy who was the architect of that moratorium.
Yeah.
So I think it's a frustrating one for EB because he wants critical minerals. He may want another LNG pipeline, which is not a trivial undertaking. And so to be told, well, actually, I think it's going to be terrific because we're going to have this, in spite of the moratorium, in spite of the other issues, in spite of your frustrations, is not a very respectful reply, especially in the wake of the letter about the ferries.
Mike, is this like, why would Mark Carney be playing so nice with Alberta and giving us in BC the cold shoulder?
Well, wow. I don't know that he's giving BC the cold shoulder, but it's
I'm shivering over here,
all.
Mike.
Yeah.
Well, guess what, folks? I'm going to say it again. We're broke. And uh, Canada needs a couple things here. We need to deal with a structural deficit. We need to diversify our trade to be less reliant on the Americans. And frankly, we need more
But
hard
not the
power.
Chinese.
Well, we need more, well,
Mm.
diversify. We don't want to have all our eggs in one basket, right? Maybe we need them in two or three. But exporting oil gives Canada more hard power. And that I think is where Carney's head is at. And Canada needs to be more, frankly, muscular in the world. And energy, he wants Canada to be an energy superpower. And I agree with our previous guest, Mr. Dix, and you, Geoff, that BC's opportunity is fundamentally natural gas, and in terms of exporting, and we do have LNG Canada Phase 2 in front of us. We do have Silism's, the Nishka project in front of us. Those are substantial projects that would create lots of revenue and jobs. But it doesn't preclude an oil pipeline. And, Adrian made his point that let's get more out of the Kinder Morgan, or keep calling it Kinder Morgan, TMX pipeline, since there's capacity. Great, let's do that. We should absolutely do that. I don't quite understand why shipping off the North Coast is more is more hazardous than shipping from Burrard Inlet, where frankly an oil incident in the Burrard Inlet would be disastrous, not just environmentally, but for whole tourism, you name it, would be disaster. It'd be disaster anywhere, let's face it. But is it impossible to do it from the North Coast? I don't think it's impossible to do it.
Oh, it's entirely possible, but
Yeah.
we focused here and put all of our spill
Well,
equipment here and everything.
but Northern Tanker Ban, I mean, like, it's just a political thing, right? Like, if we felt it was environmentally responsible to do it, if it was possible to do it, we probably could, right? So, I mean, I'm a bit of like as a British Columbian, I'm a bit like ho hum on the is this good for BC, because it's like it's not to the degree that LNG is, but we are
Mhm.
part of Canada, and fair enough if Alberta needs it. Like, if we have to listen to that, right? And Mark Carney has to listen to that.
Uh,
So
Alberta's a winner in LNG as well.
more to come. I mean, like, it will not be a picnic trying to get an oil pipeline sited on the North Coast, because depends where you put it. You still got to deal with the Haida. not to mention the Simpson and the Heisla and the Kitasoo and who everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's some of what I mean, that's what David Eby was picking up on with Mark Carney's comments, because I think there was an emphasis on trying to get to the more shovel ready, the more eminent. And this one is,
Mm.
of all the things we've heard, by far has the most, probably the longest timeline and the most barriers to implementation. So
But I think a key part, though, and I don't want to sound like a Carney apologist here, but I'm just reading, reciting what he's saying, is I think what him and Minister Hodgin are trying to get is a grand bargain on decarbonization on the oil sands.
mm,
And by carbon capture, however, and
yeah.
by making major strides on lowering emissions at source is a justification for exporting.
And I think at the same time, right, he was naming, just to pick up on what you're putting down, like Carney was naming the kind of these tandem projects, as though they were sort of tandem projects, right? The carbon capture initiative in Alberta as being the one that pairs well with the pipeline.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
it's not even clear that a pipeline is required to expand oil exports because during the battle over this under the Horgan administration, Rachel Notley went out and secured a whole bunch of rail cars, and an oil by rail solution was proposed. Whether that's a good idea or
Right.
not, others can judge. And the problems of the BC economy, which David Eby keeps insisting will be the locomotive that lead us out of our difficulties, is it's not clear how well that locomotive is firing these days with the difficulties that are finally being acknowledged in the real estate sector, developers demanding that we resume the foreign investment in our real estate sector to get a pulse back in what was 30% of the economy for many, many years. So there's a lot of other problems in the BC economy, and none of them are solved by a pipeline that
Mm.
would come maybe 5 years from now.
Okay. We'll come back to this. I need to zoom us through actually a couple pieces. I mean, I'll just make it a note. We'll say the Greens have two leadership candidates. There's Dr. Jonathan Kerr, a Comox town councillor and family physician, and then Emily Lowen, who's self-described as a 25-year-old renter and climate organizer. And I think she was part of, led a campaign at UVic to divest from fossil fuels. So we'll
So they
continue
have
watching.
candidates. They're in the
They have
race. They have
candidates.
a
There's a
leadership
meet
race.
shout out. There's a Meet the Candidates event July 11th in Vancouver at UBC. I'll drop that. But then I'm going to move us quickly to say, like, one of the green priorities is electoral reform, and a legislative special committee has been struck to discuss this topic. Mike, can you kick us off and tell us a little bit about who's on it?
Well,
Yeah.
I think this is a Green NDP deal thing where they struck this committee to the mandate includes recommendations for increasing democratic engagement and voter participation and models for electing MLAs, including proportional representation. Surprise, surprise. We've had three referendums in the last 20 years already on how we elect MLAs. All have failed, yet the Greens want to have another go at it. Um, so, I'm hoping it's collective eye roll in the NDP and then like, let's check off the box here. One thing that's I noted on the committee membership of the seven MLAs on this committee, all party committee, there's Conservatives, NDP, and Green, and one Green member, is that all are rookies. And none of these MLAs served before the last election. So,
Are you
what
flagging
is
that as a
what
concern? Yeah.
I'm flagging that as well, if something comes out of left field, maybe it's because the collective
The
memory of the
rookies.
group is about the
10 minutes long.
yeah, size of a flea. Um, but my sources tell me the Dark Lord presented to the committee the other day, that being Bill Thielman,
Oh.
and he will have, I'm sure, brought everyone to their senses on these matters. Period.
It's
Dark
a
Lord
it's a
Titular.
commitment made under the CASA deal, which we don't hear very much about, that brought the further stabilized the NDP majority of one vote. So this is the one of the things on the to-do list that had to be checked, and it's getting checked.
So
All
there
right.
is a deadline of July 25th for people to make submissions. It's on the
Mm-hmm.
legislative website. So,
Mm-hmm.
you can bet that the Greens have their little email blast going on and making sure, pro reps brought to
People.
the masses.
All right. We've checked that box now. Let's move to the minibar.
I'm going to raise a glass to two people, but they on a very critical issue. There was terrible murder in Kelowna last week that involved domestic violence. Seemed to be a key factor in it, and there's just been a report to Attorney General Nikki Sharma from Kim Manton, an eminent lawyer from Ontario, who was asked to look at ways to fight gender-based violence, which the Premier said is an epidemic. I think some of the recommendations deserve some careful scrutiny because they are internal to government. It's not clear to me how they would make a change on the ground, but I want to raise a glass to Nikki Sharma for keeping this thing going, and also to Angela Marie McDougall of the Battered Women's Support Service, who's one of a number of activists who have really made sure this stays front and center, proposed that inquests be held whenever there's a case of someone with a restraining order killing someone in a domestic dispute. A lot of important and creative pressure being put on the government, and I think that Nikki Sharma is a good person to respond. So raise a glass to both of them and look forward to seeing some results soon.
Thanks, Geoff. Mike.
I am going to, this is the most unsurprising raising of a glass for people who know me, to Christy Clark. Because she's getting some appreciation with the LNG exports happening, as is the John Horgan government as well. And Vaughn Palmer wrote a column last week noting that. And I'll raise a glass to Vaughn for acknowledging that as well. And he ended the column with a little note saying, well, when they do have a celebration with the Premier and everybody up in Kitimat for the LNG shipments, maybe they should invite Christy too. So anyway, so that's probably the number one of the top 2 or 3 legacy items, probably number 1 for the Christy Clark government is these LNG shipments ultimately happening with the support of and the completion by the Horgan government to get it done. So good for them. Thanks for acknowledgement of that, Vaughn, and acknowledging that there's now been a second cargo that's already left bound for Malaysia. So the gas is pumping, the dollars are flowing, teachers are being funded, nurses are being hired with every shipment, folks. We're only 160 billion behind with the debt, but we're chipping away, chipping away.
Taking progressive action.
That's right.
There you go. There you go. Thanks, Mike. All right. I'm going to raise my glass and I'm just going to give a shout out and a thank you to Minister Dix. My book arrived. It is not the book we discussed. Yes.
Well, I got one too.
Oh, did you? Oh, did he send us all books?
I got the Martin Robin book, Rush for Spoils.
Oh, nice. Geoff, did you get a book?
No, I haven't.
Well, look at his books.
I got a big shout out. I got
a
a big and undeserved shout out from Adrian, so I'll leave it at that.
That's fun. Yeah. Okay. I got Pillars of Profit by Martin Robin, but I just when we talked about Geoff's book, I'm still trying to get a copy of Geoff's book.
It's hard to do.
Adrian is still talking. He still thinks we're interviewing him from 2 weeks ago. He hasn't. He doesn't realize
the show's over.
We signed off on the Zoom, but apparently he's still there talking because continuing his filibuster.
That's awesome. That's awesome. All right. Well, thanks to him for the book. And then Geoff, I've still got to try and get your book, and I would like to read it this summer if we can make that happen.
Okay, I'll work on it.
Okay, there's a plan. All right. That wraps another episode. I want to thank Aaron Gunn for checking in today, and I want to thank our presenting sponsors, TELUS and Fortis BC. We will see you next week, guests. BC, you can never leave.